At all the state receptions, I went around the room and spoke to everyone. The king told me that I remained standing too long, that it tired him, and that it would be enough merely to nod and not stop and speak to those present. At the following reception, I obeyed his instructions. To my surprise, I saw that he did exactly what he had forbidden me, going up to each person and making a few pleasant remarks. Meanwhile, I remained alone standing by the chimney and waiting for him to finish. How can such jealousy be explained? I had brought my old friend, the wife of Marshal Duroc, with me from Mayence. She returned to France and took Adele with her. I have already mentioned that the latter was an exception to my husband's universal jealousy, and I have spoken of his efforts to gain her esteem. He willingly consented to her marriage with Monsieur de Broc, Grand Marshal of the Palace, who had been in love with her for a long time. Adele loved her husband, but only after she became his bride. She was too intelligent to allow herself to become unduly enthusiastic over the prospect of any marriage. And even after her family had decided that the match was a suitable one, she felt merely grateful for the affection which she knew she aroused. In France, she had had many opportunities to get married. The fact that she was known to be my friend was in itself enough to attract certain ambitious men. I had always refused to consider such suitors. Monsieur de Broc, brave, kind, and upright in character, belonging to a good family, possessing a brilliant social position, and loving her tenderly, was nevertheless not a very romantic figure. He was no hero out of a storybook, but I had come to believe that a really kind heart is enough to make one's married life happy. The idea of a marriage which would keep Adele with me was attractive. How many times afterwards did she speak to me about their peaceful, harmonious union, about her husband's respect for her and his love, which almost amounted to idolatry. Why could you not have a husband like mine, she would say. I imagined all husbands were more or less like yours in character. I expected jealousy and unkind treatment, and instead I find thoughtfulness and sincere affection. My knowledge of your home life makes mine seem all the more agreeable. How I should like to give you some scrap of this happiness, which you would so appreciate and which you so well deserve. I was delighted that my friend should be happy, but did not envy her that happiness of which she was more worthy than anyone I knew. Monsieur de Broc left for Paris to marry her. After Adele's departure and that of Madame de Roc, my life grew still more dreary. Till then, the presence of my friends had acted as a restraint on my husband. Now there was no reason for him to spare my feelings. He took pleasure in making our discord known and attracted public attention to our domestic difficulties. He came to my part of the palace only at dinner time by the state stairways and went back to his own apartments immediately afterward. He went to the theater alone, gave informal evening concerts, to which my ladies in waiting were invited, but from which I was excluded. I bore all these strange whims patiently. I endured them in silence as long as they did not become a topic for public gossip. What was I to do now that I had become the victim of his opinions? Even if he tried to be fair and impartial, he was obliged, on account of the way in which he had treated me, to believe that I had done wrong in order to justify himself in his own eyes. I should have done the same had I been called upon to judge a woman in the same predicament as that in which I found myself. Was it possible to imagine that a husband deliberately sought to ruin his wife's reputation simply for the satisfaction of besmirching her and without even a shadow of evidence against her? All these thoughts drove me to despair. A prisoner in my palace, I no longer dared receive even the visits of my young ladies in waiting or leave my apartment to go and see one of them if she happened to be ill. A valet who had followed one of the royalist exiles abroad was engaged to wait on me. He always slept in my anteroom and wrote down how many times my young ladies came in to see me. I often noticed that. When bringing in wood for the fire without anyone having ordered him to do so, he would push aside the curtains in front of the windows to see if there were not someone behind them. I pretended not to notice these actions. I knew too well whose orders and instructions he was obeying to wish to have them repeated to me by a servant. Madame de Boubers once found this man hidden in my children's room. She was alarmed on their account and considered it her duty to mention the matter to my husband, who sent him away for a little while. How often have I, when alone with my children, one on my knees, the other playing beside me, composed some melancholy ballad, or wept as I embraced them. The eldest looked at me as though he sympathized with my troubles. In spite of his youth, he seemed to understand my grief. His affection for me was beyond words. The king called him one day to sit beside him, but the little boy would not leave me. I asked him to do so, explaining that his father would be cross with him, but he took my hand and nestled closer to my side. I noticed that my husband looked annoyed. The idea occurred to me to say to the child, "Your father will be cross with me." Immediately he ran to Louis with an eagerness which touched me. When some visitor in my drawing room exhibited a talent as a singer and received applause, my son would come over to me and say in a low voice, "Please sing too, Mama, to show how well you sing." Once when I was overcome with grief, I heard him say in a whisper to his brother, who wished to go to his nurse, "Stay with Mother, she's crying, she feels badly." These words renewed my courage. "Here I have my consolation," I exclaimed, pressing them both to my bosom. "God is just. Everything on earth has its compensation. My happiness lies in my children. They can never fail me." At other times, such thoughts increased my sadness. "The world will condemn me," I said to myself. "My children are too young to be able to judge for themselves. Someday, their affection for me will be tarnished by the evil reports that may be repeated in their presence." This idea increased my sorrow. I did not know what refuge my imagination could find. Incredible as it may seem, I even came to believe that only a surprise attack by the English troops in which I should be taken prisoner would give me a few moments' respite. My favorite walk was along the dunes. From there I could see some large English vessels which were doubtless engaged in the smuggling trade. I left my carriage waiting for me some distance off on the highway, accompanied only by my ladies in waiting. I approached the sea and seemed to expose myself intentionally, putting myself within the enemy's grasp. I fancied that if I were captured, they would shut me up in a tower, but would let me have my drawing materials. There at least I should breathe freely. There too, my reputation would no longer be attacked, and although separated from my children, they would be brought up to love and respect my memory. Such were my fondest hopes. But if I stopped and thought of my children's extreme youth, if I imagined one of them ill and needing my care, then I would banish these mad and foolish ideas and resign myself to my sad fate. After this life of torment and tears had lasted some time, my husband one day came upstairs to see me, a letter from the emperor in his hand. He was much upset. "You must have been complaining about me," he said. "This is what my brother writes. How unfortunate I am." I read the following reproaches from the emperor. "I have heard the manner in which you treat your wife. All those about you are scandalized at your conduct. I wish you were as so many men are in Paris. You would be deceived and perhaps be happier. Instead of that, I gave you a virtuous wife, and you do not know how to appreciate her." I returned the letter to my husband, assuring him that I had never complained to anyone, and that, as a matter of fact, he read everything I wrote the emperor. "Then it must be the French ambassador," he insisted angrily. "I shall refuse to receive him any more alone. He shall only be allowed to call with the rest of the diplomatic corps. How unfair people are, to dare to say that I treat you badly. Please write my brother that there is not a word of truth in these reports." I did as he asked, and in my letter to the emperor, I found courage to say that I was happy. By some curious chance, the English newspapers a short time later repeated the reproaches the emperor had made my husband about the way in which he treated me. This would indicate that not all of my husband's secretaries were French. I do not know if he appreciated my behavior and my refusal to make public my just cause for complaint. At all events, he inflicted a new form of torture on me. One evening, he came up the secret stairway that connected his room with mine and gave me to understand that my life and my reputation were in his hands. "I love you," he declared. "You know that. But I am ashamed to be obliged to pass as my wife's discarded lover. Let us set an example of perfect harmony, of complete domestic happiness. Then you will find me again at your knees. But you, on your part, whenever we are in public, must give demonstrative signs of your affection for me. A woman's honesty is judged by the degree in which she adores her husband." "I cannot deceive you," I replied. "I do not know what the outward signs of a wife's love for her husband may be. I shall never behave other than seems suitable to me. As far as my affection for you is concerned, you have crushed it. I am far from my country, my family, my friends. You are all I have. Be kind to me, and I will love you. But one cannot in a day forget what one has suffered. Be a father to me. I need one. Give me a little sincere affection, and my heart will respond." I thought my words had touched him, for he exclaimed, "Ah, Hortense, if you only loved me, you would be perfect. We could still be happy together if you only wish it. I long to be reconciled with you, but only on one condition. You must confess to me the wrongs you have committed." I began to smile. "My goodness," I answered, "if I did not commit any, it was not your fault. It was because I enjoyed having a clear conscience." "I am sure of it," he replied. "Tell me all and I will forgive you." For an entire month, he not only wrote me by day, but he also disturbed my slumbers at night, repeating constantly the same thing. He would come in through a little door which opened on my alcove, and which I had not dared lock for fear of arousing his suspicions, and wake me up suddenly. I found myself obliged to listen to all his lamentations. He became more and more despondent. I did not know what to do. I was so worn out and unstrung that I was obliged to ask him to postpone the rest of the discussion till the following day. He would do so and return with more of the same reproaches. "You have made me the unhappiest man in all the world," he said. "I firmly wish to be reconciled and know the truth. Otherwise, we will separate forever. I am writing my brother that I am prepared to give up everything. I cannot live with a person who makes me suffer so. You will end by killing me, and have that on your conscience. It is grief that is making me ill. You are destroying my health." "What am I to do?" I cried, with tears running down my cheeks. "After all your reproaches, if I have done wrong, I should admit it. Look at me closely. Truth is something one can see. Do you find in my expression that embarrassment which denotes the criminal?" Nothing could satisfy him. He adopted another line of conduct one day, coming to me in triumph. "You refuse to confess anything. Very well. I tell you, I now know all and have proof of your guilt." "That cannot be true," I replied firmly and without pausing to weigh my words. "One cannot have proofs of events which never occurred. If I were guilty, your trick might succeed. But it is disgraceful for you to invent such a tale." He remained motionless and did not say a word. Nevertheless, he kept constantly coming back to the idea that such absolute virtue could not possibly exist. More exhausted than I can say by this constantly renewed persecution, I became like one of those unfortunates who on the rack make a false confession in order to escape further agony. I conceived the idea of making up some story that would put an end to this state of things and cause my husband to leave me alone. I was only embarrassed as to the name of my accomplice. I could not deliberately inflict my husband's hatred on someone, and I wished to choose a person who was no longer alive. Adele was no longer with me. I confided my plan to Madame de Boubers, who for a long time had been a witness of my misfortunes. She protested against my doing such a thing, and finally made me promise that I would not carry out my plan. At last, my husband, worn out by his useless efforts, appeared one day with a peace treaty, which he wished us to sign. He promised that if I did so, he would make me happy. If I refused, he would complain of my conduct to the emperor in the strongest terms. I asked him to leave me this document in order to give me an opportunity to answer each clause separately. Here it is. I have always kept a copy of it. "We, Louis and Hortense, desire to put an end to the state of mental discomfort and constraint in which we both have been living for a long time, and we consider that our mutual enmity since our marriage has been due to the fact that we married before we had come to care for each other. Desiring to find a means by which we may hereafter live happily and profit by the experience of the last 5 years, we have resolved to observe the resolution set forth in the present private deed to which we have opposed our signatures. We each of us swear and promise before God to fulfill all the conditions set forth herewith. Paragraph 1. It is agreed that all mistakes, errors, and faults of whatever nature they may have been, which may have been committed by either of us in the past, and which may have been prejudicial to the other, are hereby annulled, forgiven, and canceled, and it is forbidden to refer in any way to the unhappy past. Paragraph 2. We promise henceforth to cherish one another, not merely because we are husband and wife, but of our own free will, and as though we had chosen each other free from any constraint. We promise not to separate under any pretext, nor ask to do so. Should such a request be made, the other party shall refuse to accede to it. We shall prefer each other to any or all members of our respective families. Lastly, we shall show both in public and private our mutual love and confidence. Paragraph 3. We promise on our honor not to correspond, I, Louis Bonaparte, with any woman without the Queen's permission, and I, Hortense, with any man without my husband's permission, and this without any further explanation, but out of a spirit of reciprocity. Paragraph 4. We both promise to unite our efforts and to make common cause to keep the guardianship of our children and not allow them to be adopted by the Emperor or the Empress. Paragraph 5. We promise never to disagree in public and to make all our demands on one another when we are alone together. Paragraph 6. We solemnly promise on our honor to receive no visitor and to go nowhere ourselves without having informed the other party in this agreement of the fact. And we further promise, I, Louis, not to receive any woman, and I, Hortense, not to receive any man or any woman without my husband's permission. Paragraph 7. We promise that the arrangement of our apartments and the choice of our tenants shall be such as is mutually agreeable, and that nothing shall be done until both parties have agreed upon it. We will examine and discuss together the arrangements that already exist. Paragraph 8. We promise to have only one purse. That is to say that Hortense shall have no private funds of her own, and that no correspondence about business matters is to be carried on by the Queen without the King's consent. By performing and carrying out the above conditions in a loyal and scrupulous manner, we hope to live as respectable and honorable people. And in order to confirm our reconciliation, we hereby promise solemnly to live entirely for one another and for our children. Signed, Louis. This is the reply that I wrote in the margin of Louis's contract. I cannot sign this agreement because I refuse to deceive you, and it is impossible for me to carry out the points specified in it. According to the first paragraph, I must forget the wrongs that have been done to me. I can do my best to achieve this, but it is not in a single day that one can wipe out so many years of unhappiness. Moreover, my ability to forget the past depends entirely on your behavior towards me. If you show that you admire and trust me, it will be possible for me to care for you again. As regards to paragraph 2, you have not made me so happy that you can take the place of my entire family. The latter consists of the Emperor, whom I have always considered as my father, the Empress, and my brother. I shall take advantage of every opportunity that occurs to be near them. As for paragraph 3, how can you expect me to write to my family only when you allow me to do so? As far as other persons are concerned, I agree readily enough. Paragraph 4. You have the right to appoint and dismiss all the persons who belong to my household. I have never appointed anyone without your approval, but I shall never approve of the dismissal of anyone who has done nothing wrong. Paragraph 5. My hopes and my happiness consist in having my children with me, but God is master of their fate, and it is for him to decide what that fate shall be. Paragraph 6 is easy enough to fulfill. Paragraphs 7 and 8 show how little confidence you have in me. It would, however, be easy enough to conform to them, disagreeable as it is to realize that they are prompted by suspicions. The above indicates my point of view, which is totally different from yours. If all these discussions are painful, it is because they lead nowhere, and because I have lost all hope of finding a solution. You demand immediately something that only time can give, and especially that frankness and confidence which you have never shown me. Nevertheless, you may be sure that whatever may be your behavior toward me, my friendship for you will always continue, and that the father of my children can never become indifferent to me. Hortense.